Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition and Fighter Jargon. Alright, so let's talk about Fighter Jargon. So Fighter Jargon is specifically when you are, basically, fighters are using special terminology that are specific to what they're doing, that is not specifically connected to their gear, but is specifically connected to how they do what they do, right? And specifically doing what they do with flourish, right? All right, so to set this idea in place, and I'm going to talk about why you should do it and how to do it, all right? All right, so to set this in place, first I got to tell you the source, all right? So I'm a huge fan of Scotty Kramer, and Scotty Kramer is a world-class BMX expert. So BMX was started when bicyclists started riding their bikes on motocross tracks, right? And so that was the genesis of BMX. So Scotty Kramer is world-class BMX expert. And right now he lives in New Jersey, lives very close to where I live. He has a huge YouTube channel, and he has a whole crew of guys that he travels around. He travels around New Jersey locally, and then he'll also go pretty much all over the world. I've seen him take his crew over to England, South America, certainly the West Coast, and different places all over the U.S. So he really is a world traveler connected to BMX, right? And I was watching his channel, and the guys that now actually at this point Scotty Kramer doesn't ride anymore. He actually trains riders, and he was training some riders, and they're at a BMX park, and they're doing their thing, and it was really wild. And I started to listen to so Scotty Kramer was actually looking at some of his old tape of himself doing these runs in a big indoor BMX park. And at this point, I'm going to need to talk to you about BMX tricks. But I have some mnemonics because I want to talk about specific tricks, and I'm also going to set a mnemonic for talking to you about the fighter jargon as well. So I just need to say these to myself. So a snicked toucan whipping his tail and riding a toboggan with flares, and then a copper herald stomping and ripping a berry. All right, so those are my mnemonics. Let's get into this. All right, so I was watching Scotty Kramer, and he was watching one of his old tapes of himself on a BMX park, and he said the following. He's like, "Well, here you can see I ride a flare. I do a tail whip into a flare, and then I do an XX with a can, throwing that into a toboggan." And I'm like, what? I was like, holy crap, right? Now, I know what every single one of these is, but like the way, but he was sequencing them, right? Every single one of these is a BMX trick, right? So a can is where you're up in the air and you throw your leg over this side of the bike, right? A tail whip is when you hop off the bike and you whip the entire bike around the center post where the handlebars are, right? And the whole bike 360s and comes back underneath you. It's an incredible trick, right? A flare is where you do a backflip with a 180, right? A toboggan is where you throw the bike out in front of you and you actually grab the seat, right? And the handlebars kind of go 90 degrees, right? So that's the toboggan, the flare, the X up. Oh, and then an X up is where you turn the handlebars basically 90 degrees, okay? And it's just a quick flourish that you do on a trick. So that's the X up, that's the can, that's the toboggan, that's the flare and the tail whip, right? So basically, and what was really fascinating was essentially what Scotty Kramer was doing at the time was he was riding his bike at high speed through this park, right? And riding a bike, we all take it for granted, but the reality is you have to be balancing and you have to be careful, you have to be alert, right? Even to just ride in a straight line, right? You can fall over if you because you have to pedal and you have to steer at the same time, all simultaneously, right? Now, you know, so you have all that going on. And then he was going over these jumps, right? And the jumps, you have to time this perfect. Like, you have to go up at the jump at the right speed. When you get up there, you have to get your bike over the transverse, right? And you have to make sure that you're going to land your wheels in alignment, and you have to land with the correct amount of force. Not too much force, not too little force. You have to make sure your feet are on the pedal. You have to make sure you have a good grip on your handles, right? Now, all of these Scotty Kramer and all his guys, they can ride on these. They can ride in a straight line. They can ride through a turn. They can make these jumps, right? But on top of that, they're adding these tricks, right? They're adding the flare, the toboggan, right? They're adding the X-up. They're adding the can, right? They're adding the tail whip. These are, and every single one of these is a separate trick, and they can sequence them, right? So they'll talk to each other and they'll go, well, what if I can to a flare, and then and then do an X-up into a toboggan, right? So they can sequence these, right? Now I just gave you 5 air tricks. I'm not kidding. There's easily 50 air tricks, and there are 50 ground tricks on top of that, right? And so once you have all these different tricks, you could sequence them, right? Now, Scotty Kramer, he deals with people from all over the world, and one of his guys is a Valley bro, right? Like, it basically uses Valley speak, and is from the San Fernando Valley. Back in the 80s, Valley girls became famous for their Valley speak. They have this, like, very distinct way that they speak. It's a little bit humorous, but it's fun and it's charming, And so let's talk about how you can introduce fighter jargon into your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. But first I want to talk about why, okay? And so why should you consider adding fighter jargon to your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game? Well, one, I'm very convinced that fighters are really given very short shrift in Dungeons & Dragons. They're so, like, if you look at the player's handbook, literally half of that book has to do with wizards, right? Because of the spells and all that stuff, and there's so much complexity behind wizards, and fighters are just like, oh, let's swing our sword again. Excuse me, and it's really not fair, and I just think there's a better way to do this, right? So you have that going on, right? And so if you add fighter jargon, it gives a layer of complexity to the fighters, and also really gives them a chance to shine, and it just adds another layer to their complexity, their awesomeness, and puts some focus on them in the game, right? Now, one of the things is, why would fighters use jargon? Well, fighters are going to use jargon for the exact same reason that BMXers use jargon. Professional BMXers use jargon. By the way, Scotty Kramer and his crew, they're all professionals, right? They're all sponsored. They all get money for what they do, right? All right, so basically, the reason they use jargon is 3 reasons. First is focus, right? So they are incredibly focused on what they're doing, and they have their own specialized language. That's what jargon is. It's a specialized language for what you are doing, for your behaviors, your equipment, the combination of your behaviors and your equipment, right? And your environment and your configuration, right? All of that goes into jargon, right? Sequencing is a big part of it, right? And so basically, when people are really into something, they develop their own language, and then they use that language between each other, right? It's quite significant, right? All right, so you have all that going on, right? And so you have focus is one reason why you would use jargon. Another reason why you would use jargon is abstraction. Basically, when, one of the things, we don't talk about this, well, actually, BMXers don't talk about this a lot, but Scotty Kramer was very, very badly injured at one point in his career, right? And so one of the things is, when they talk about this stuff, what they're doing is frightening. Just exactly like what fighters do is frightening, right? And this gives them a layer of abstraction, so they can talk about the things they're going to do without actually saying, I'm going to jump 20 feet over that wooden transverse with all those nails sticking out. and then I'm going to come back down on the hard concrete, and I'm going to land it perfectly. And if I don't, I'll probably die. Really, like it's much better to say, "Oh, I'm going to do a tabletop over the transfers." You know, like it's a layer of abstraction, right? So, and then the last one is fun. It's very like when you listen to the names, right? Can, X-Up, Flare, Toboggan, you know, Tail Whip. It's fun. They're having fun, right? So focus, abstraction, fun. These are reasons why you would choose to use jargon, right? And so now let's talk about fighter jargon. How do you do this, right? Well, I think one of the easiest ways to do this is do an homage to BMXers, right? So you can all take yourselves right over to Scotty Kramer's channel and watch any of his videos, because they use this jargon in all the videos, right? And his channel is super fun, and you'll get like the energy of his crew, and you'll hear the jargon, right? And that's what you want to do. So how I would introduce this is I would have your player character adventuring group end up near Iron Crag Valley, right? Now, they're going to be near this valley, and this valley is near these smoking mountains. There's a lot of lava. There's no trees. It's terrible, like a really harsh environment, right? Now, in the Iron Crag Mountains, there are thousands of goblins that live in the Iron Crag Mountains, right? And in this one specific valley, it's the main exit out of that mountainous area. And so basically, goblins will come out in small bands of maybe 10, all the way up to as high as 100, right? So there are these fighters there, the Valley Bros, right? And they use this jargon, right? Now, there are all these cities and manses and nobles that are within about 50 miles of this Iron Crag Mountain area, and they all pay a bounty. They pay a bounty per right goblin ear, right? And so these Valley Bros, all they do is stay around stay around the Iron Crag Valley, and they kill goblins. They do it all the time, right? And they have their own jargon. So I'll give you 5 elements of their own jargon. All right, okay. The first is copper, right? Now a copper is a cheap shot. So they'll say, "Oh, hey, did you?" So I'll give you each of the jargons, and I'll show you how they would sequence, right? So a copper is a cheap shot. It's when you go up to a goblin, snatch that goblin's own weapon, and hit the goblin with their own weapon. And they call it a copper because it's cheap, right? Like a copper coin, right? And then there's the herald. The herald is when you go to 2 or 3 goblins, and you go, "I'm going to kick you in the teeth. I'm going to cut your right leg off, and then I'm going to smash you with my shield." You actually announce what you're going to do. You herald it, right? And then you do it, right? So that's a herald, right? All right. The stomping gromp. The stomping gromp is when you run over, jump on top of a goblin, right? Actually knock them to the ground, and then stand on their chest as you attack another goblin. That's a stomping gromp, okay? All right, the berry drop, all right? The berry drop is where you come up with your sword, and you specifically lop off the hand of a goblin, the melee weapon wielding hand of a goblin. So a goblin has a rusty dagger, it's going to cut you, right? You come up and you do a berry drop. You cut its hand off, and that hand just drops with the melee weapon onto the ground. It's called a berry drop, right? And and then the last one is the rip skip, right? Now the rip skip is when you run up to 4 or 5 goblins, you cut, skip, cut, right? So basically, you cut one goblin, you purposely skip another goblin, and you just like smile at him, right? And then you go to your 3rd and your 4th goblin, and you cut, right? Now, what's happening here, right? So, and then basically the Valley Bros will say, "Dude, you see me copper that dude?" And then follow it up with a herald right into a rip skip, right? There you go, right? Just like the BMXers, right? And the thing is, now, I think a lot of people will look at this and see it from a comedic light, right? And it absolutely can be. Now, the idea is not to present this as a comedy, but almost just to give a little bit of light and levity. Like the Iron Crag area, there's a bunch of goblins. They come down and they attack a bunch of villages and towns and noble areas, right? Noble people's areas. And like when they attack, there's terror. Like it's terrible, right? But when faced with terrible things, people laugh or cry, right? So one, you don't want to, introduce this as a comedic element, but it can be winsome. It can just kind of bring a bit of levity to your game, a spot of brightness, that kind of thing, right? So this fighter jargon is really interesting, and you could use this sequencing. Now, the reason why, and one of the things you could do is when you introduce the Valley Bros, one of the things that you're doing is you're in a very subtle way acknowledging the awesomeness of your fighters. Because clearly these Valley Bros, right, every single day they're putting their lives on the line to go and do this thing that they do every day, right? Like this is a milk run for them, right? And so that's important to understand. And basically they want to talk to each other, and they're using this jargon to give themselves goals, right? To give themselves the ability to do what they do, to do their milk run with flourish, right? And that's important, right? And so, and basically, and if you establish the Valley Bros in your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition campaign, you're really honoring your fighter. And I think that's really neat. I think that's incredibly necessary, because I think fighter is the class that gets the absolute least amount of shine in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So this is a cool way to honor your fighters and acknowledge that what they do is incredibly dangerous. But to them and to their characters, it might be really fun. And, and just taking down an opponent, that's a milk run for them, right? Like not everything is so serious all the time, right? Especially when you do the same thing all the time. Even though it could seem like an incredibly daunting task to some people, to other people, it would seem like a minor thing. And that's clear with Scotty Kramer's crew. These guys have done so many backflips and front flips and, on bikes that they don't even think about it, right? But you and I could snap our necks and, be in an ICU for the rest of our lives. We even tried this once, and for them, it's just a Tuesday, right? So I think fighter jargon is a really cool addition to your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. And I think I've done what I could to kind of present it and show you how you can introduce it into your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you have any suggestions for any cool fighter jargon moves that we could add? Also, I love this idea too, that now that we are establishing fighter jargon, right? We could start to do sequencing and then also think about air tricks and ground tricks. I love that idea. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.